Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching the Today I Found Out YouTube channel, and in the video today we're looking at what happens if you leave your house to a pet in your will. To a lot of people, the idea of a person leaving money in their will to a pet instead of a charity or, their own family or friends seems something only an eccentric wealthy person would do. In reality though, a pet trust, it's not only surprisingly common, but it's one most legal experts recommend for any pet owner who cares for their animal. But how do you go about accomplishing this and making sure your wishes are followed? Despite sounding like something you'd need an army of lawyers to draft into a will to make sure the courts would allow such a thing, in truth, any lawyer worth their salt who has knowledge of wills should be able to relatively inexpensively add provisions to an estate to plan care for a pet. In fact, every state in the United States, with the exception of Minnesota, has laws on the books detailing pet trusts and their enforcement to help simplify things just a little bit. For those in the UK who are watching, British law also has similar provisions which allow pet owners to make provisions for a pet in their will. So yes, you can actually leave a house to a pet, though if you wanted that pet to be able to keep the house, you would need to add in some funds for necessary taxes, upkeep, and of course specify someone to actually take care of the animal in question and properly incentivize them to do so. As not all pets are created equal, pet owners are advised to be as pedantic as they want when it comes to laying out the terms of a pet trust and how the pet should be cared for. This can be as simple as specifying how often said pet has to be taken for a walk to what brand of baby food that it has to be fed. That last one is actually a stipulation taken directly from the will of singer Dusty Springfield for how her beloved cat Nicholas should be taken care of. So yes, even audible requirements can be put in. Okay, so this brings us to the money. Now for most pet owners, it is unsurprisingly advised to set aside enough money in a trust to take care of the animal in question for the duration of its projected natural lifespan in accordance with the manner of care to which it is accustomed. As some people have more money than others, this is where pet trusts can get a little silly. For example, there was a case of someone who left a $13 million estate to a cat that they rescued. And if you do leave such an insanely valuable estate to a pet, while many families may attempt to challenge your will in hopes of getting the money for themselves, assuming you hired a reasonably competent estate lawyer to draw up the whole thing, there usually shouldn't be any issue, though there are occasional exceptions, as with everything. So how does the dog or cat actually get the money you left? Well, in short, they don't directly. If you put in your will that you leave your cat along with $5,000 to be used for its care to your sister, the money will ultimately be doled out to your sister by the executor of the will, and after that, depending on the region you live, your sister may or may not be free to do with the money what she will. In fact, it can even be the case that she can leave the cat on the side of the road on the way home if she so chooses. That said, some regions do have pet trust laws that help get around this issue, allowing you to simply say something like, I leave $5,000 to be used for the care of my pet fish, and be reasonably sure that things will be executed such that the money will be used appropriately. However, just to make absolutely sure, when you are making a simple directive like this in a will, it's best to designate a trusted person as the caretaker and/or simply set up a pet trust explicitly. On that note, explicitly setting up a trust has another huge advantage over just bequeathing money to your pet and relying on statutory pet trust laws, if any. If you do the latter, there will be a gap between when you die and when your will goes through the probate process, potentially meaning no one is taking care of your pet in the interim. If the funds needed to care for the pet aren't available until, say, a house is sold or the like, this might be a very long gap. By setting up the trust when you're alive, the trust takes effect the moment you die, getting around the problem completely. You may also stipulate in your will a trust to be set up upon your death to your specifications, called a testamentary trust. However, this suffers from the same delay period in which no one is obliged to ensure your pet's care, and no funds may be available for that care for some amount of time. In either case, as with a trust fund for a child, in this case, when a pet is bequeathed an amount of money, and perhaps even something like a house for its care, a trustee is appointed, either by the courts or by the will holder prior to death, to decide how and when potential funds get distributed. The money will inevitably be paid to a designated caretaker who will physically take care of the animal in accordance with with the wishes stipulated in the will. To ensure that no shenanigans ensue, you may specify an enforcer should be appointed to keep tabs on how the money is being spent and ensure that no funds are misappropriated by either the trustee or the caretaker. This system gives both peace of mind to a person looking to care for their pet after they die and ensures that their final wishes are respected. Now, in many such cases, a designated caretaker will see some benefit from taking care of a given animal, either in the form of money for their time or even the ability to live in a piece of property the animal inherited. This gives caretakers an incentive to keep the animal alive and cared for, but also means there's an incentive to cheat the system. As lawyer Gideon Rothschild of Moses and Singers notes, there's a risk that when the cat dies and the person doesn't want to stop taking their money, they'll go out and buy a cat that looks exactly like the other cat so they don't have to stop. As such, it's recommended to do such things as include some mechanism to ensure the pet being cared for is really your former pet, even potentially requiring DNA testing of the animal upon your death and regular checkups thereafter, or potentially limiting the amount of time a trustee will pay out to a caretaker for a given pet, with the time frame being around the likely lifespan of said pet. Some even opt to include an additional stipulation that will compensate the caretaker should the animal die to help ensure they accurately report the death. This later one comes with an additional problem that a caretaker may decide to go all Aristocats on the dead person's pets and try to kill them to get the lump sum sooner. This potentially necessitates further stipulations in the will to cover all such scenarios in a way that ensures that your pet is cared for to your liking. Again, we should highlight that there's nothing wrong with being overly pedantic in setting up such a pet trust to ensure that your wishes are being followed exactly without any loopholes. At this point, you now might be wondering what happens to any money left over when the animal itself dies. Unless otherwise specified in the form of a remainder beneficiary being noted, it will likely be absorbed back into your estate and bequeathed appropriately from there, though if you literally did not specify at all what is to be done, there's potential that the courts end up deciding this one, so it's best to be explicit here as well. Whether you specify a remainder beneficiary or not, this may provide another risk factor to your pet from particularly unscrupulous individuals. For instance, if you were to leave a house and appropriate funds to your cat and give the rest of your estate to, for instance, your cousin, or similarly, if you explicitly stipulated that once the cat dies, the cousin gets any remaining funds, this gives that person incentive to accidentally run over the cat or feed it antifreeze or the like. To get around this issue, it's not uncommon for people to stipulate that remaining funds simply go to a non-profit organization like an animal shelter or the like. On that note, we should address what happens if the amount of money you leave to an animal is so exorbitant that it gets challenged in court by those who feel the money should have gone to them. This shouldn't be a problem at all if everything was set up right, but it can occasionally be for outside reasons. To illustrate this, let's refer to perhaps the most famous example of animal nepotism, Trouble the dog. Formerly owned by the so-called Queen of Mean, eccentric billionaire businesswoman Leona Helmsley, Trouble was a Maltese bequeathed $12 million after Helmsley's death in 2007. Upon this particular stipulation being contested, owing to it being determined that Helmsley was mentally unfit when the will was written, a judge famously ruled that this amount was far greater than was needed to care for the dog, even taking into account its lifestyle of being hand-fed things like fresh crab cakes and steamed vegetables. Instead, the judge awarded the dog, who it should be noted was already fairly elderly for the breed at 12 years old, the average Maltese lives 12 to 15 years, a more conservative $2 million. The other $10 million originally designated was given to two of Helmsley's grandchildren, total of $3 million each, who she had disinherited for unspecified reasons, unlike her other grandchildren who all received large sums, and the remaining $4 million went to Harry B. Helmsley's charitable trust. Beyond the dog suddenly losing $10 million, the new caretaker of Trouble, Carl Leckick, the general manager of Helmsley Sandcastle Hotel, famously switched from feeding Trouble her high-end fare to simply giving her run-of-the-mill canned dog food. As for the rest of the money, this amount not only paid for her now mostly common dog food to the tune of about $100 a month, but also care, grooming at an astounding $8,000 per year, medical bills at $2,500 to $18,000 per year owing to kidney and other health problems, and a caretaker fee at $60,000 per year, as well as full-time security which cost $100,000 per year. If the last one sounds odd, it should be noted that the well-publicized dog was the frequent recipient of death and kidnapping threats, and even had to travel under an alias at one point for her own protection. For the curious, Trouble passed away 4 years after her former master in 2011, and the remainder of the dog's fortune, given the quoted numbers, presumably about $1.3 million, reverted back to the aforementioned Helmsley Charitable Trust, which Helmsley had previously bequeathed a little over $4 billion to, the bulk of her estate. Today, that trust is worth over $5 billion and has issued grants totaling about $1.6 billion to fund various organizations and research. Now, at this point you might be wondering, what happens if the money in the trust runs out and the pet is still living? In this case, it's common to simply let the caregiver decide what happens, perhaps continuing to care for the animal if they want to, or perhaps not. However, if you're not comfortable leaving it up to said individual, you may specify exactly what you want done here as well, such as giving the animal to a no-kill shelter or the like, in the hopes that they'll be able to find a new home for it with someone who will care for it of their own volition, rather than because of some financial incentive. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below, and don't forget to subscribe for brand new videos just like this every day of the week, Monday through Sunday. Also, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/TodayIFoundOut to learn more about that. We've got loads of cool perks lined up for people who support us, and as always, thank you for watching.